Crown Court, P743/227. Part 1, Take 1.
Edited copy.
All stand.
In the Crown Court today, there's a conflict between two very different ways of life, represented by two generations of a family. The plaintiff being sworn in now is Lance Porter, one of the great names in pop music. He's seeking a declaration that his father, the Reverend Fortescue Porter, a country vicar, obtained from him by fraud the copyright of a musical work. Because of this allegation of fraud, the case is being heard before a jury. Lance Porter is represented by Mr. Jonathan Fry, QC.
Is your name Lancelot Ashley Porter?
Yes.
And you live at Grangefield Manor, Weybridge in Surrey?
I did when this action was put down for hearing. I moved last month into an hotel.
But does Grangefield Manor remain your property?
I'm trying to sell it if I can find a buyer. It's a very large house. I can't afford to live there any longer.
We'll come to that in a moment. What is your occupation, Mr. Porter?
I'm a musician.
And do you have any special training in that field?
I won a scholarship to the Royal College of Music and studied there for a diploma.
Did you complete that course of study?
No.
Why was that?
I decided it was time to make a living.
Didn't you feel you'd be better qualified for that if you had received a diploma?
Not necessarily, no. You see, my original interest was in what you might call serious music, but I soon realized I wasn't cut out for that.
What exactly were you studying at the college? Musical composition or one particular instrument?
Both, my lord. I studied the piano and the organ. My father was particularly keen on that. I think it was his ambition that I should end up as a cathedral organist.
In fact, your subsequent career took a rather different direction, didn't it?
Yes, some of the other students and myself got together a group to play at dances and so on, and we started to experiment. I found out that what I was really interested in was progressive rock.
Did you say progressive rock?
A kind of music, my lord.
Yes, indeed, but what kind, Mr. Fry?
Without going into technicalities,
I suppose the main characteristic is the strong underlying beat. The tone colours and harmonies, of course, can vary a great deal, but there is this basic rhythmic feeling. Afro-Cuban, I suppose. I'm afraid it's a bit difficult to explain.
It's easier to recognize than describe, as someone once said about the elephant.
the point I was trying to make, my lord, is that this music is secular rather than ecclesiastic.
I rather thought so, Mr. Fry.
And were those songs recorded and offered for sale?
Yes, I was very lucky. One of the recording companies got interested, and after a couple of singles, they decided to put out an album. That was when I decided to chuck the college and go full-time.
And what, roughly speaking, have been the financial benefits to you?
From the first album?
I mean, on average, your earnings as a songwriter.
Well, it was a steady living for about 3 years. 5,000 a year, I suppose. That was before things really took off.
What caused them to take off?
Well, in spring of 1970, I was approached by a theatrical management in London who were very keen to do a musical on a religious subject.
A musical play?
Yes. There'd been a couple of very successful ones on Broadway, and they were prepared to put up a great deal of money. They were convinced they were going to make a profit.
And did they, Mr. Porter?
Yes, they certainly did.
When the idea of a musical play based on a religious theme was first discussed, did you say anything about this to your father?
Yes, of course, on several occasions. In May, June 1970. I wanted his help in choosing a subject. I mean, he does know far more about the Bible than I do. The crucifixion had already been done, and Joseph and his brethren and the 12 disciples, and there really didn't seem much left.
What subject did you eventually decide on?
The Nativity.
And what title did you give this work?
It was called Jesus Baby. with a comma and an exclamation mark, my lord.
Did you discuss this subject with your father, as you said, in mid-1970?
Yes.
Did he object to it?
No, not at all.
Was this work produced on the London stage?
Yes, with great success, and in Rome, Paris, and New York. A film version was made last year.
And what have been the financial benefits to you?
None whatever.
Why is that, Mr. Porter?
I entered into an agreement with my father. I assigned the entire copyright over to him.
What was the effect of that agreement?
All the performing rights and royalties in the play and in the records of the music were to go to him, every penny. He became the owner. I had no claims on it at all.
Was this before or after the play Jesus Baby was first performed?
While I was writing it.
Now, if we look at page 1 of the agreed bundle of documents, we see there, do we not, the assignment? It's undated.
Yes.
How was this agreement with your father made?
I phoned him up and told him what I was thinking of doing.
When did you telephone? Can you remember?
I think it was January the 24th, 1971.
And then what did you do?
I went to see him at the vicarage.
When was that?
February the 1st.
1971?
Yes.
And what did you say to him?
I said I wanted to give him the copyright of the musical I was writing.
You'd already written much of it by then.
Yes.
Did you tell him why you wanted to do this?
Yes, I explained that there were several reasons. The most important being that he'd paid for my education, and it seemed like a good way of giving him something in return.
How much had your education cost?
I don't know. A few thousand, I suppose. And I'm sure he thought it had been wasted, so it seemed like a good idea. I did point out that I might be giving him something completely worthless. I was a complete gambler at this stage. Rather like giving him a ticket in a raffle.
Did you discuss the possibility that you might be giving him the winning ticket?
Yes. He said he hoped the show would be a success because there were several things that needed doing in the parish. A new roof for the church hall, that sort of thing. Yes, I don't actually think that he quite grasped what a lot of money might be involved. I mean, neither did I at this stage. We were talking in terms of, I don't know, £5,000.
Not $250,000.
No. I did point out, though, that there might be a great deal more than either of us imagined. I'd read somewhere that Agatha Christie had assigned the copyright of Mousetrap to somebody. I don't know, I think her grandson. Nobody could have foreseen how long that would run.
Was there any further discussion of the possibility that it might be a success on the scale of the Mousetrap?
Yes. I said that if my play ran for as long as the Mousetrap, and for some reason I found myself broke, then I'd expect him to help me out. Besides, he might need a bit of money himself one day. So I said that he wasn't to give the copyright away, and if it made money, he wasn't to spend it all on the village hall or give it away to Oxfam or Christian Aid or something like that.
And what was his reply to that?
Well, he said a gift with conditions attached wasn't a gift. And I said that I wasn't asking for any promises, I just wanted to know what he had in mind.
And what did he say?
He said he wouldn't dream of giving the copyright away, and he agreed that it would be sensible if it made any money to keep a bit for ourselves. I said that he should keep a sizable chunk, because in the music business, success can disappear overnight.
What was his comment on that?
He said he thought it was very unlikely, but of course he'd never let me starve.
Now, was any limit set to the amount of money that he would give you if you found yourself in need?
No, I mean, because at this stage, as I said, we didn't know how much was going to be involved.
Was anybody else present at this interview?
Yes, Mr. Plenderbooth.
Who's he?
He manages my financial affairs, contracts, income tax, and so on. I'm not very good at that sort of thing.
Was anything said about the legal aspect of what you were preparing to do?
Mr. Plenderbooth said that we ought to see a solicitor first, take legal advice, so that we got the wording right.
And did you take that advice?
Yes, apparently it was quite simple. We went to see Father again the following week.
By we, you mean you and Mr. Plenderbooth?
Yes. He wrote out the assignment on a piece of paper, I signed it and gave it to Father.
Now, will you look at the first document in the agreed bundle of documents on page 1? Is that the assignment?
Yes, it just says that I am assigning the copyright in Jesus Baby entirely and irrevocably to him.
You did not put a date on the piece of paper?
No, my lord.
Mr. Porter, would you have given your father this copyright if you had known that he would give it all away?
Oh, no, I wanted some benefit from it from him and myself.
Now, let's move on a year or two after the play had been produced and become an international success. Did you at any time remind your father of this conversation with him in February of 1971?
Yes. I went to see him on April the 12th of last year. I pointed out that he'd made an unexpected fortune out of Jesus Baby and that I was absolutely broke. I was in every sort of trouble with the tax authorities and I was having to sell the house to make ends meet.
Why was this, Mr. Porter?
Well, a most extraordinary thing. As I said, before I wrote this play, I was making quite a good living out of my songs, $5,000 a year. And afterwards, when it was such a success, I got all sorts of offers. And somehow, nothing I wrote seemed to be any good at all. I wrote another play and spent a great deal of my own money in promoting it, making demonstration records, that sort of thing. I don't know whether I just lost my talent or whether it was a change in fashion. Anyway, it turned out that the only money-making thing I'd ever written or was ever likely to write was Jesus Baby. And I'd given that away to my father, so naturally I went to see him.
And did you ask him to honor the understanding that had been reached?
Yes, I didn't put it quite as formally as that. I asked him to let me have £10,000.
What was his reply?
He said he didn't have the money to give me. He'd use the copyright to set up a charitable trust, and most of the proceeds had gone on various charitable projects.
The whole $250,000?
Well, I don't think it amounted to that much at that stage, but it was certainly more than 100,000.
Did the Reverend Mr. Porter say what he'd been doing with this money?
He mentioned renovating the church and building a new church hall, but I think that most of it had gone into some charitable trust or other.
At all events, it was not available to you.
No, he made that quite clear. Treated me rather like the prodigal son, the only difference being that there wasn't going to be any fatted calf.
Did he say why he'd given the copyright away?
Yes, he gave me quite a lecture. He said that the money had been got by exploiting the Bible story. Perverting it, I think is what he actually said. And the only way to redress the balance was by using it for God's work.
Did he express any opinion on the quality of the play itself?
Yes, he said it was nauseating.
Had you seen it?
Oh, no, I don't think so. But that wouldn't make any difference. He's always expressing strong opinions on things he knows nothing about.
But you said that when the idea of a musical play based on a religious theme was first brought up in mid-1970, your father raised no objections.
No, on the contrary, he was quite enthusiastic about it. Mind you, he probably thought it was going to be the sort of thing that would get put on at Christmas in church halls, with all the little kiddies dressed as angels, that sort of thing.
Why do you suppose he later took such a violent dislike to it without having seen it?
Well, I think somebody had seen it and told him all about it. Well, in fact, I know she had, because she came in while Father and I were talking and started making all kinds of snide remarks.
Who do you mean by she?
Mrs. Harper Frost. She's a sort of queen bee in Father's parish, sits on all the committees and gets up bazaars and that sort of thing. I think she'd been to London to see the show and had given Father a really lurid account of it. She's very keen on purity. I mean, if somebody says damn on television, she starts ringing up the Daily Telegraph and that sort of thing. I don't think Jesus would have been her cup of tea at all.
So you think this lady had influenced your father with her opinions?
Yes, I'm sure of it. I mean, even before she'd seen the show. I think that my father told her about my telephone call in January, and before I went to see him, they had the whole thing worked out. I think they were going to use every penny, if it made money, to what Mrs. Harper Frost would consider good works.
Now, you said that at that interview, in the presence of your business manager, Mr. Plenderbooth, your father said that he intended to keep the copyright and attenuate some of the royalties in case you or he ever found yourselves in need. Is it your case that he never intended to honor that agreement?
Yes. I think he was deliberately deceiving me. I think he'd made up his mind that the money was somehow tainted, and it didn't really matter who he gave the money to, as long as it didn't come back to the person who'd earned it. Me.
Mr. Fry, I think it would help us all to know what is the position of the trustees who are now the owners of the copyright.
The position, my lord, is that they have agreed to be bound by the outcome of these proceedings. Then if the fraud is established, they will reassign the copyright to the plaintiff together with any of the proceeds still in their hands. They will not, however, have to account for any of the monies already spent.
They have agreed that to save the expense of further proceedings, of third-party proceedings.
Yes, Lord.
Very sensible. Thank you, Mr. Fry. Very well, Mr. Lotterby.
Mr. Porter, you said in your evidence in chief that this musical play of yours, Jesus Baby, was not the usual kind of nativity play that one might expect to see performed in a village hall. Now, for the benefit of those of us unfortunates who have not seen the play, could you describe what sort of thing it was?
Yes, it was an unconventional treatment of the theme.
Yes, well, can you elaborate on that?
Well, for a start, it was set in the present day. We didn't feel it would be quite right to have the contemporary music and people going around in costumes of naught AD.
In some cases, were there no costumes at all?
Where appropriate, yes. The angels didn't wear anything. How would you dress a contemporary angel?
And how closely did the plot resemble the Bible story?
Well, in my view, very closely. Everyone had to find parallels, of course. There aren't many mangers around these days. So we had Joseph and Mary as squatters in an unoccupied office building, in the underground car park.
Yes, I see. And did a large number of people take offence at this treatment of the theme?
A few did. The sort of people who take offence at anything.
Yes, well, it wasn't the kind of entertainment that your father, for instance, would have appreciated.
If he'd taken the trouble to see it, he might have understood what I was getting at.
You said you made him a gift of the copyright for various reasons.
That's right.
But you only mentioned one, that you wanted to reimburse him for the cost of your education.
Yes.
But you had a scholarship to the Royal College of Music, did you not? And a full maintenance grant from the local education authority.
Yes.
So your father didn't pay for the major part of your musical education. What were the other reasons, Mr. Porter?
I suppose I just wanted to give him something.
At that time, were you in comfortable financial circumstances?
Yes, as I said, I was earning about $5,000 a year. I went up and down a bit, but that would be the average.
And Mr. Plenderbooth was looking after your financial arrangements?
Yes, I took him on about that time.
Why did you decide to employ this business manager?
Well, I hadn't been very clever with my money. Whenever I'd had a successful record, I didn't always put enough aside for tax.
Or were you in trouble with the Inland Revenue?
No, nothing serious, no. But I thought I ought to have somebody to look after that side of things, and he was recommended to me by some friends in the business. And after a few months, he got everything straightened out.
You put your financial affairs entirely in his hands?
Yes.
And fell in with any arrangements he proposed?
It seemed the best thing to do, yes.
And was one of these arrangements suggested by Mr. Plenterbooth that you should assign the copyright in Jesus Baby to your father?
Yes, I believe it was his idea, basically. It wouldn't have occurred to me, but it did seem like a good idea.
In order to save tax?
No, I said I wanted to give my father something, and Mr. Plenderbooth suggested arranging the copyright, and he assured me there was nothing illegal in the arrangement. Look, honestly, there is no point in asking me about this. I left all that to him.
Yes, but you would know, would you not, that your father, as a clergyman on a modest stipend, would be paying a lower rate of tax on the copyright income than a successful songwriter like yourself.
Look, if you're suggesting it was some kind of
Oh,
fiddle...
please don't misunderstand me, Mr. Porter. It may well be that your intention was to make a generous gift to your father, but one effect of this arrangement would be that considerably less tax would be taken by the Inland Revenue. That's all I was trying to
Lord, I don't want to interrupt my learned friend, but he may be giving the impression that there was something reprehensible in this arrangement.
Yes, of course, Mr. Fry. I think I should tell members of the jury the law makes a very clear distinction between the evasion of tax, which is a criminal offence, and the avoidance of tax, which is not. A man is perfectly entitled to arrange his affairs so that he pays as little income tax as possible, provided he does it in a legal way.
I'm obliged to your lordship.
Of course, I was not implying that there was anything improper in this arrangement, so long as it was intended that the Reverend Mr. Porter should keep the money or dispose of it in any way he chose. But the question is, was that the whole reason?
Yes. Apart from what I've already said.
You were, in fact, using your father, weren't you?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you were using him, firstly, to avoid paying a large amount of tax at a time when, as you've said, you were in trouble with the Inland Revenue. And secondly, you were using him as a kind of bank on which you could draw out any amount at any time. Now, wasn't that the real object of the exercise?
That is not true. It was meant as an outright gift to give him a bit of extra income. so that he could do the things in a parish that needed doing.
Now, why didn't you give him cash? In that way, you could have set a limit to the amount.
Well, in the first place, I didn't have any. And there was another reason. My father has never shown any understanding or even interest, come to that, in what I've been trying to do. Now, look, I don't expect him to appreciate my pop songs. But when I wrote this play, I thought there might just be a possibility that he would see that I was trying to do, in my own way, what he'd been trying to do all his life. Make the Gospels into something alive, into something that has meaning now.
Complete with nude angels and the infant Jesus in a garage.
Oh, dear. There's nothing new in that. All the paintings of the Nativity are in modern dress, or in what was modern dress when they were painted. All the Madonnas by the Italian and Flemish painters are wearing perfectly ordinary costumes of the period, not fancy dress. That's why people believed in the Bible characters in those days. They recognized them as people like themselves.
From the newspapers, you know, it would appear that a good many people thought that your motives were purely commercial and sensational.
And that was very stupid of them.
Yes, you wrote the play out of deep religious conviction, did you?
I wrote it because it was commissioned by a very rich and influential management. And having agreed to take it on, I wrote it as well as I could, because I think it's a great and a moving story, and I wanted to do justice to it. I was perfectly sincere in my intentions, and I wanted my father to appreciate that fact. We've had a few misunderstandings, and I thought it might draw us closer together. That is why I made him a present of the play.
But this was suggested, was it not, by Mr. Plenderbooth? Now, do you suppose that his reasons were quite so altruistic?
All I know is that when he suggested I give the copyright in the play to my father, I agreed, gladly.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Porter. No further questions.
Do you wish to re-examine the plaintiff, Mr. Fry?
Lord, Mr. Porter, it's been suggested that the object of this arrangement was to secure certain tax advantages. Was that your understanding of the matter?
Honestly, it didn't occur to me.
Your only purpose was to help your father and to create a better understanding between you.
Yes.
From that point of view, was the arrangement a success?
Well, from the point of view of helping him financially, yes, of course it was. I'm sorry to say that we're no closer to understanding each other than we were before.
Thank you, that's all. Does your lordship have any questions?
Oh, no. Very well. You may leave the box, Mr. Porter.
I call Charles Henry Plenderbooth.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Is your name Charles Henry Plenderbooth?
Yes, that is correct.
And do you live at 12 Belgrave Street, London Southwest 1?
Yes, I do.
How would you describe your occupation, Mr. Plenderbooth?
I'm a director of several companies in the entertainment business.
And what is your connection with the plaintiff, Mr. Lance Porter?
I'm a director of several companies, of which he is a co-director.
Several.
Yes, there's Porter Booth Productions, Lance International, Plenderland Projects. They're all limited companies engaged in the exploitation of Mr. Porter's talents.
Would it be correct to describe you as his business manager?
Well, I prefer the term business advisor.
At the end of 1970 and the beginning of 1971, when he was engaged in writing the script and composing the music for a play called Jesus Baby, did you give him certain advice about disposing of the royalties?
Yes, he said that he wanted to make some provision for his father, a gentleman in holy orders. So I suggested that the copyright in this religious work might make an appropriate gift.
What was Mr. Porter's reaction?
Well, he liked the idea very much.
And what did you think of the arrangement?
To be honest, I thought it would be very good publicity.
As his business advisor, did you think that Mr. Porter was in a position to renounce all the income from this play?
Well, financially, he was in a very healthy position. I mean, quite frankly, I would have preferred him to go on writing songs. I mean, if you write a pop song and it turns out no good, well, what have you wasted, half an hour? But a play is different. You have to attend conferences and rehearsals and take people out to lunch. It can be 6 months' work for nothing. Now, I was getting a great deal of interest from the States. Several of the big stars liked his numbers. There could have been a fortune in it. But no, he had to go and write this play.
If you'd foreseen that the play would be so successful, would you have allowed him to give away the rights?
Well, unfortunately, I wasn't interested in the play. I thought he'd go on writing these money-making songs. And if it made him happy to mess around in the theatre at the same time, well, why not?
You'd no means of telling whether the play would be a success?
Well, I thought it was going to be a real 22-carat flop. I mean to say, a musical with a baby in the lead, who needs it? Now, I thought that I was a pretty good judge of public taste, but how do you know these days? I thought the boy was giving away nothing. And look what happened.
The case of Porter against Porter will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.